Renegade, Chapter 10, page number. Led the way to this room where the CIA agents lay in wait. Jakob followed the man and felt himself calm almost to the point of numbness. He silently prayed and readied himself to take the lives of his enemies if the situation called for that. But he hoped that it did not. Live CIA agents were much better than dead ones. One of the CIA men lounged at the end of the hallway, just as Borisov had advised them. The man made an effort to not notice them, to continue looking out the nearby window. That wasn't a true reaction. A man who had been in the hallway with nothing but time on his hands would have looked to see who had arrived. Borisov used his key to open the door. After all, this was supposed to be his room, the place where he was conducting business with Yakov. The Russian stepped back from the open door and waved Yakov inside. Heart pounding smoothly behind his sternum and pulsing in his ears, Yakov entered the room as though he suspected nothing. Dressed in shalwar kameez and pakols, the two remaining CIA agents sat at the table in the center of the room. Though one of the men was black and the other was heavily tanned, Yakov could see their nationality stamped into their features. They had lived lives of comfort, and Yakov despised them for that. Americans warred with impunity in Afghanistan, forcing everyone to heel under their tyranny and their godlessness. There was no disguise for that. Their Pashtun guides sat on a couch against the wall to the left. The room was small and neat, but it had seen better days a long time ago. The stink of cigarettes and hashish clung to the yellowed walls. Jakob stopped only a few feet into the room. Hassan was just behind him. The Al-Qaeda leader let suspicion show on his face, knowing that in this next moment he might die, but God would have the virgins waiting for him for dying in his holiest of wars. The CIA agents exploded into action. Unable to keep themselves still, they pulled pistols from their clothing. "Hold it right there, Jakob. Raise your hands or you're a dead man." Even as weapons filled the American's hands, though, Hassan was faster still. As Jakob raised his hands, the boy stepped slightly around the Al-Qaeda leader and fired immediately. Jakob kept himself still, trusting his faith and Hassan's skill. The boy proved to be spectacular. His bullets tore at the flesh of the Americans, punching into their legs and arms. A round struck one of the CIA agents in the hand. The second man got off one shot before he went down, but he too fell as his wounded legs buckled under him. Jakob leaped forward and grabbed the pistol from the wounded man. As he stood, he turned the weapon on the Pashtun guide still seated on the couch. Neither of those men looked like they knew what they needed to do. Jakob shot them both in the face, dropping their corpses to the couch. Turning, Jakob spotted Hassan lying on the floor, his brown eyes wide in surprise. Blood spread from the center of his chest, growing as Jakob watched. "Hassan!" Forgetting himself for a moment, thinking only of the boy's loss, Jakob dropped to his knees beside Hassan. As he saw the spreading blood pool, Jakob knew there was nothing that he could do. Hassan was dying. Crimson bubbles burst across the boy's lips as his face visibly paled during a shaky, forced breath. Borisov cursed in his native language and clawed for the pistol in his pocket. He couldn't get it out before the last CIA agent filled the doorway. Almost as soon as the man appeared, though, he stumbled back, and his right arm went limp, dropping the pistol he'd held in his hand. Blood gushed from the wound high up on his arm. Reacting instantly, Borisov finished drawing his pistol, and then swung the pistol in a backhanded blow that slammed against the CIA agent's forehead. Unconscious immediately, the man sank bonelessly to the ground. "Mullah!" Hassan's voice was so weak, it was almost inaudible. Resting his hand on the boy's shoulder, Jakob knelt over him, leaning in close so that he could hear him. "Yes." "Did I only wound them?" "You did. You were amazing, Hassan. Truly, God has blessed you." With a final shudder, Hassan relaxed in death. His pupils bloomed in his eyes till there was no color left, and nothing of the boy remained in his body. Praying, Jakob closed the boy's eyes, then stood and looked through the window to see Wali leaving the opposite building and crossing the street. One of the CIA agents moaned as he clutched his maimed hand. Wali, Faisal, and more of Jakob's men rushed into the room. Jakob pointed at the moaning man. Get a tourniquet on his arm. I do not wish for him to bleed out now that we have him. Faisal knelt to tend to the task himself, using a shoestring from the man's own footwear. Quickly, the CIA agents were gathered up by Jakob's warriors and carried into the hallway. Wally stared at the dead boy. Page 82. He did his job, Wally. There was no hesitation in him. You trained him well. Take pride in what you gave him. Wally nodded, and then leaned down and picked up the small corpse. He carried the dead boy out into the hallway, too. He would not be left to be defiled by whomever the Americans recruited to investigate the incident. Out in the hallway, Jakob followed the others down the stairs. On the first floor, they did not leave the building and go out onto the street. They went into the back room, then down into one of the smugglers' tunnels that had been constructed beneath various buildings in the city. Townspeople also used them to escape structures that had been targeted. Jakob took one of the candles from the shelf built into the wall, behind the short ladder that led into the tunnel. He lit it from Borisov's, and then followed the big Russian through the darkness. Well, you have your CIA agents, as you wished, Jakob. I am curious, though, as to what you're going to do with them. You will see soon enough. The world will know. What do you mean they're gone? Carter stood to one side of the control center and took the call from Langley. Langley is a CIA agency in Langley, Virginia, where they have the CIA. Okay, it's headquarters, basically. Over his headset. I mean, they're gone. This was Carter's first time to deal with the CIA special agent in charge, Marshal Stivers, and he was definitely not a fan of the man. Instead of determining what could be done and to find his team, Stivers seemed more intent on making sure the blame for their loss was placed elsewhere. Of course, to be fair, there was a lot of stress on the CIA SAC now that one of his teams had been taken from a region they weren't officially allowed in. The Pakistanis had been adamant about clearing the spy agency out of the country. How could you people have just lose my team? With all respect, this is not our operation. We were picking up the pieces from your agency. Your team got lost because you people lost them. We were trying to help you keep a visual on them. In the end, that wasn't possible. Carter glanced at the tablet he was carrying that linked him to information streaming in from the control center. Prentice was running recon on the area, watching as many of the streets as she could, but that was going to be wasted effort in the end. The city was too large for one drone to cover. A Reaper's usefulness, like any other tool in the military arsenal, was limited by available information. You probably know Par-Shinar as well as I do, Special Agent Stivers. All Feta lands are veritable smugglers' paradises. Black market goods and contraband filter through that region like grease through a goose. Carter wasn't exactly sure what that last meant, but it was something his grandfather had often said. If you can get me a 20 on those men, I can get a bird in the air to keep track of them. When someone goes missing like this, it takes boots on the ground to locate them again. With a final snarl curse, Stivers broke the connection. Turning around, Carter faced the control center and studied the panel in front of the apprentice. The city lay revealed before them, but there was no clue where the CIA team had disappeared to. On the screen to the right, the faces of the three agents were lined up. Carter and his team hadn't been given their names. That information was strictly need to know, and Carter had been informed that he didn't need to know. He accepted that. Prentice's shoulders had bowed with tension. This was a frequent problem with the cyber unit. Everything was at a distance. Sitting in Nevada, halfway around the world, the remote operators often forgot that the distance separated them from everything happening over page 84. There, until something went wrong. Then that separation became painfully apparent. Take a moment, Prentice. You're not going to find them by going blind staring at that monitor. I know. Prentice took a deep breath and leaned back. I know that losing them wasn't my fault. I've done this long enough to know to realize we're limited to what we do. We're a backup measure at best, and only occasionally strike capable. That's right. But I still feel like there's something I should be doing. You're doing it. You're looking for those men. Prentice adjusted her headset. I've got an electronic signal coming from inside that building. It's a video feed. Put it on the screen. Carter's phone rang and he automatically answered. Carter, Stivers spoke without preamble. I've got a local team on site at the structure. I need you to piggyback a signal through your bird. Can do. They've already pinged us. We're not going to be in real time with them. We're compressing the encrypting and encrypting the data. Carter covered the mouthpiece and relayed the request to Prentice. Anger tainted Stiver's words. I know the drill. Just get it to me. I've got an analyst waiting on it. Carter bit back a sharp retort. Evidently, the guy didn't have to be polite at Langley. He just had to be good at what he did. Losing a team wasn't a measure of competency. The data stream unpacked and showed on the panel, revealing the bloody room where the CIA team had evidently met whatever fate they'd encountered. Blood stained the walls. Two dead men sat slunched on a couch. When the man providing the video turned, a pool of blood was revealed on the floor near the door. Another was just outside the entrance. There was no sign of the three faces on Apprentice's second panel, but the room had been turned into a charnel house. Abruptly, the camera turned again, briefly catching the legs of another person in the room as well. Prentice looked up at Carter and mouthed, relaying. Carter nodded and spoke into the mouthpiece. Are you getting this? Looking at it now. The camera view suddenly shifted again, lowering to the floor and increasing magnification. It took Carter a moment to figure out what the cameraman was focusing on, and then, when he did figure it out, he wished he didn't know. Two human fingers lay under the sofa the dead man sat on. One of them had been severed at the knuckle, the other at the second joint. Both amputated digits showed obvious trauma, not clean cuts. Prentice's reflection in the panel took on a more somber cast. Her mouth became a hard line. Without a word, she opened the drawer in front of her and slid a hand inside. From the time that he had worked with her, Carter knew she kept a Bible there, a touchstone for faith and family. She once told him. After a moment, she took her hand back out and seemed a little more composed. On the panel, a man's hand appeared in front of the camera and scooped up the two amputated fingers. Then the camera's digital upload ceased, clearing the panel so only the syringe image of Parshinar streets and surrounding snow-capped mountains stood revealed. That'll do, Carter. Thank you for your assistance. Stivers hung up before Carter could respond. Prentice looked at Carter as he punched off the phone. Think those, she paused, belong to one of the missing agents? Yeah. Page 86. A shiver passed through Prentice. So, who took the video? Probably one of the CIA assets in the area. Somebody like those two Pushtons who were dead in that room. Prentice hesitated. I might be able to blow up some frames of those fingers, maybe pull the friction ridges and search through the system for who they belong to. Carter shook his head. The CIA knows who they belong to. We're out of it, Prentice. Unless they call us back in. Until then, he nodded to her desk. Maybe you could say a prayer for those men. I already have been. Yeah, me too. I think they're gonna need it. Chapter 11. Arms crossed, back against the wall, Pike sat on a hard bench bolted to the cinder block wall. The cops and frequent visitors called the large community cell Gen Pop, short for General Population. The strong stench of unwashed bodies, vomit, and urine stained the air, but the smells were customary things to Pike. He'd spent plenty of days in places that were a lot worse than the jail he was currently in. Two young black men still occasionally glared at Pike from their seats on the floor. Last night had been Friday, and the jail usually spiked in volume on weekend nights. More police were looking for callers in the streets, and more people were out in those streets. One of the young guys had an eye that was swollen shut. Pike had given him that when he and his buddy had tried to take Pike's space on the bench. The fight had been brief, over in seconds, and the jail's trustees had blown the incident off without writing it up. As a result of the fight, the other black men in the cell gave Pike the stink eye too. He didn't take it personally. Color was one of the first divisive things in lockup. Race made it easy to figure out who was us and them were. Weakness was another way. A man who didn't fight for his own space was a victim waiting to happen several times over. In the orphanage, Pike had learned never to be a victim. Back then, he'd, page 88, packed batteries and bars of soap into tube socks to create a makeshift blackjacks. That education had come in at the hands of other kids who'd taken what little he'd had. He learned to fight, to look out for himself, and he never lost anything else except to sneak thieves who stole his stuff without revealing themselves. Thieves were the worst because most of the time nobody knew who they were. Once their identity was found out, though, being a thief in a group home was the worst experience ever. Things had been better after Pike had gotten to know Petey. Both of them were fighters and schemers. They'd use their fist and they'd use their cunning. And they'd both read a lot of books. Pike favored histories because seeing how other civilizations handled adversity gave him insights into the person he'd wanted to be and how he could get there. Petey had liked caper novels, books about heisters and boosters. He wanted to live outside the fringes when he grew up, be a hardcore criminal. Pike had just wanted to survive. Still, there was something about them, about the way they thought and the way they handled themselves, that left them connected. Petey had been the first to show that desire. When Pike was 11, when the orphanage had almost given up on finding him a foster home that would stick, he had gotten crossways with 5 older boys who had formed a gang inside the group home. 2 of them had taken a new kid's stuff. The kid had just lost his mom to an overdose and his dad to prison, and nobody in either parent's family wanted to take him. He was just another reject from the real world. He'd still cried himself to sleep most nights. Later that day, Pike had cornered the 2 guys and told them to give the kid's stuff back. They refused. Pike beat them both down to the ground and then took the stuff back to the kid. It wasn't much, just a book his mom had read to him sometimes and a ball cap he'd taken from when his dad had taken him to a baseball game. The pack of lifesavers one of the administrators had given him was long gone, but there was no helping that. The kid was grateful and tried to hang out with Pike sometimes, and that hadn't worked though. Pike was a loner, and the kid got farmed out to a foster home a couple days later. After that, the 3 other guys who had belonged to the same gang as the 2 Pike had beaten up returned from their short-lived forays into foster homes. They brought swag back with them, things they'd stolen from the foster families, pocket change and a few dollars. They found out what Pike had done and they came after him. At the time, with 5 on 1, Pike figured the guys were going to kill him. He'd been going down, and then Petey had come out of nowhere, yelling like some ancient Viking warrior. Together, Pike and Petey had proved to be more than the gang could handle. The home administrators ended up pulling them off the 5 guys because Pike and Petey wanted to make sure those guys stayed beaten down and wouldn't try that again. The home administrators had split up the gang anyway. In no way would those guys ever feel brave enough to come after Pike on their own. Pike had felt certain that would be the last he'd see of Petey, but somebody somewhere had decided to leave the boys together, and that was how they'd finished up their tour through the orphanage together. They'd shared comics, a few books, and chased after the same girls during the social activities the orphanage set up in an effort to integrate them into the straight world. That had been what they'd called it, the straight world. Petey and Pike hadn't cared for the straight world. There were too many rules and expectations, and they both already knew those were bad things. Page 90. Pike stretched his legs and smiled a little at the memories. Those had been good times, as good as they got in the orphanage anyway. Getting to know Petey had changed Pike's life. He closed his eyes and breathed in and out just the way he had back in the orphanage at night after lights out. Sitting there on that bench in Gen Pop, he felt more relaxed than he had in weeks. After breakfast, a cold biscuit sandwich made with powdered eggs that stank and had an off taste, Pike got sprung. That surprised him, because he'd figured it being Friday night, when he got popped, he'd be in jail for the weekend. Instead, shortly after 9 o'clock, the trustee came for him and let him out. The trustee was a young black guy who looked clean and neat, but had eyes that said they'd seen too much. Got your clothes in the changing room. Drop the jumpsuit in the laundry hamper. Then go out to the other door. There's a detective waiting for you. Who? The trustee shook his head. I don't know. They just told me to give you the message. Thanks. Pike turned to go. Hey, Marine. Surprised, Pike turned back to look at the young guy. I saw your file. I'm a Marine Reserve too. I just got activated. You? Pike shook his head. You probably will be soon. Things are heating up in Afghanistan again. The Tangos are on the warpath with a vengeance. You don't want to sit this one out, do you? No, I don't. With the way he was feeling and how things were going, Pike needed a war. Keep it together, man. Sounds like you got picked up on a bogus beef. I ain't nobody's. I hear nobody's filing any charges. You protected that woman. Ain't nobody gonna cry foul over that. Guy you busted up is shipping back to prison on Monday. Way I hear it, that couldn't happen to a more deserving guy. Pike nodded and reached out to shake the young man's hand. Good luck, Marine. You too. The young man's grip was sure and strong. Dressed in yesterday's grease-stained clothes and wanting a shower and maybe a more substantive breakfast, Pike followed the paint line on the floor that would take him out of the jail. When he stopped at the property room to claim his personal effects, Detective Tom Horner stood there waiting on him. The detective had on a suit that looked freshly shaved, his cheeks gleaming. He sipped from a styrofoam cup, and the strong smell of coffee wafted to Pike's nose. Mr. Morgan? Detective Horner? Pike stepped to the property clerk's window. Then maybe we'd have a word. Go ahead, but I'm not going to be here long. Horner scowled, but he waved to the property clerk. Get squared away here first. Behind the bar is a young black woman with gold highlights in her hair, and long blue nails, looked at Pike, and then at the computer monitor to one side. Pike Morgan? Pike nodded and stood there as she reached for a manila envelope with his name written on it. She dumped the contents onto the counter in front of her, checked his driver's license, and then took out the inventory list and checked the items. There wasn't much. Pike traveled light. Page 92. After he signed the inventory sheet, Pike turned and headed down the hallway, still following the painted line to the outside world. Horner fell into step beside him. No charges were filed against you. Good to know. If you hadn't hurt that man so badly last night, the detectives probably would have brought you in. They were just doing their jobs. I got no complaint. As far as hurting that guy, he came at me with a knife. Things could have gone a whole lot different, except that would have been even worse for Hector, and Pike knew it. During the night, he'd worried about Hector, hoping the boy was doing all right in spite of everything that had happened. I know that. I also know that you were careful not to kill anybody at that crack house. I don't know anything about that. I got a phone call through our chief's offices. I don't know who he talked to, but somebody wants me to give you a pass on this. Pike didn't say anything. Nothing to say? No. Who are you, Pike? Really? Pike looked at the man then. Nobody you would want to know, detective. Me and you, we ride separate sides of the road. He put his hand against the door and pushed through into the bright heat of the day. Taking his Oakleys, he slipped them on and kept walking into the parking lot. I came out here this morning to let you know that I'm dropping the investigation into that crack house because I decided to, not because of that phone call. You want to know what changed my mind? Pike shrugged. The guys watching you yesterday said that you were helping that kid with his math. That stopped Pike in his tracks. He spun and faced the detective. Let's make sure we have something straight. That kid stays out of whatever business you and I have. Horner held his ground, his face serious. I've got kids, Pike. I've helped them with their homework. These days, I help them with decisions they make. They don't always listen, but I'm there when they need me. Something like that means a lot. Pike nodded, but he didn't know what to say. I'm letting off the investigation into the crack house, but I'm going to step up the investigation into the people who put it into business. I'll make sure that they get the message that the neighborhood is off limits. The announcement made Pike feel strangely uneasy. The whole week was off kilter, and he didn't like it. Roll with the flow, bro. Pike knew that was what Petey would have told him, and then he would have made fun of Pike for being weirded out by what was obviously just a run of good luck. That would be good. Some decent people in that neighborhood. Horner looked at him. I know. I want to help keep it that way. And if you let me, I'll give you a ride back to wherever you want to go. I'll make my own way. Before Horner could respond, Pike turned and walked away. Since it was Saturday and a training weekend for the local Little League, Monty was off somewhere with his son and the team. The garage was locked up and it looked like everything there was fine. Pike paid the taxi driver and got out. He grabbed the mail from the box, then passed through the security gate. Inside, he locked the gate. Page 94. Behind him, because the garage didn't take new business on Saturdays. As he crossed the graveling parking area, he checked to make sure that all the cars were there. The Ford that had come in with a burned valve and a Subaru SUV that had needed a brake job were gone, but the owners had been scheduled to pick them up Friday evening. As he walked towards the garage, Pike tried to recall seeing them in the lot when the cops loaded him into the back of the patrol car, but he couldn't. Monty had been gone. That much Pike had known because the security gate was locked down. Sliding the key into the door, Pike let himself into the garage. Instantly, the shadows trapped inside welcomed him into their embrace, and the worry and tension that was eating at him seemed to drop away a little. Heat filled the building, and he felt like he had to push his way through it as he went to the office. He flicked on the light and ran through the sheets, making certain the Ford and the Subaru had made it back to their owners. Monty had signed off on both, paid in full. That meant the floor safe would have Pike's cut of those jobs. Pike left the money there because he didn't need it and didn't intend to do anything with it for the moment. He dropped the wad of mail on Monty's desk and sorted through it quickly. Most of the contents were advertisements, coupons, and junk mail offering credit cards, money for college, and reduced auto insurance. But there was an official letter addressed to Pike Morgan. He always filled out the garage's address for personal correspondence. The letter was from the Marine Corps, and it was short and sweet, letting him know that he'd been activated and was going to be shipped to Afghanistan from California with Charlie Company. More of the knot in Pike's gut loosened. He could shake it loose from Tulsa in a matter of days. He could shake loose from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He pocketed the letter, then noticed a post-it note with Monty's handwriting affixed to the computer monitor. Hey, Pike, I called the jail. They said they were cutting you loose in the morning. So, knowing you'll stop by here sometime Saturday. Dude, you ain't got nothing but bad luck following you around, seems like. If you need something, give me a call. A number was listed at the bottom of the note. Pike recognized it as Monty's cell phone. The man didn't give that out to anybody except family, but he'd given it to Pike. Pike had never called it. Don't need nothing, Monty, but thanks anyway. Pike plucked the note from the monitor, wadded it with his hand, and fired it into the trash can beside the desk. The post-it note rolled off the hill of debris. Grimacing, Pike grabbed the trash can and took it outside to the dumpster behind the building. Monty was a good mechanic, but he couldn't spot an overflowing trash can if his life depended on it. Back in the building, Pike placed the empty trash can beside the desk and checked the sign-in sheet. Monty evidently had a couple of people call in for the coming week. The workload looked light. New tires, oil change, AC service, nothing challenging. Out in the service bay, Pike looked at Mrs. Garcia's car again and thought about climbing under the hood to take another stab at tracking down the elusive electrical problem. He glared at the car, suddenly realizing he knew too much of its history, too. Everything was too familiar, and it was going to be just as familiar the next day. He let things get too close to him, and he realized it for the first time. That scarred him more than crack dealers with guns and detectives with handcuffs. Unwilling to stay any longer, Pike decided to get breakfast, then figure out where his head was at. Something was wrong with him. He just didn't know what it was, but he knew someone he could talk to. Okay, end of chapter 11.